Good morning. I'm happy to be here. I'm a little surprised, to tell you the truth. The reviewers noted that it was kind of, not much research here. And I was a little concerned about that until I heard Tim McKay's talk the other day. And I decided that, like Tim McKay, what I've been doing is observational research. And it actually seems fitting in the educational environment parallel to astrophysics, because like the night sky, things in education seem to change about that quickly. So I would describe my methodology then as ethnography. And so I have lived in the environment with the subjects. And I've been doing this ethnographic study for 35 years. I guess I started in 1982. Show of hands, how many people in the room are K-12 certified? Certified as K-12 teachers. Okay, so quite a few, a handful of us. And a lot of what my talk will be about is the perspective from K-12 education on this collaboration, on this learning analytics type of collaboration. As I did mention in my paper, the athletics side has made some magnificent strides over the last couple of years, and we've seen that in the work of the keynote speakers, and we've seen that in the work that people are presenting here. But there's another side of the learning analytics equation, and that is the actual learning side, the work that teachers do. And what I want to bring to you just this morning is kind of the perspective, is the way that teachers see the possibility of a collaboration between researchers and themselves in their classrooms. And so I have this disclaimer up here. The slide is actually a little too wide for the screen. I kind of want to turn my thing here and see if I can get, but so I will share with you some opinions and things that I've collected over the years from my experience. Now, I mentioned I started in 1982. I was a high school mathematics teacher. I taught high school mathematics for 10 years. And then I became a school principal, and I was a school principal for 10 years. So besides spending time in my own classroom for a long period of time, I also spent a lot of time in other people's classrooms and evaluating and talking with them in and out of the classrooms about issues in education and things that they talked to me about. And so I bring that to, I was also a technology coordinator in my school district, which meant I was in more classrooms as people were implementing technology in their classrooms. So I have a lot of experience from that perspective, both formally and then informally in the environments. And that's what I'm going to bring to you in my talk. And so some of the things that I will say don't necessarily reflect my own opinions, but are opinions of the educators. What we know about education, and when I say we, what teachers know, is that it is a very social environment that's mediated by cultural factors, and it's mediated by historical factors, and it is driven, it is articulated, it is orchestrated by the classroom teacher. When the bell rings, that's when the show starts, and that's when you have control over those environments. And so as a classroom teacher, you have to earn your bones, okay? You have to earn your credentials, and you earn your credentials by doing a number of different types of things. You have to grade late into the night. You have to have playground duty. You have to, you got to break up your first fight. You have to just be incredibly vexed by a student in the classroom. You have to deal with an angry parent who's trying to rip you a new one. You have to get down on your knees with the kids. You have to deal with kids that come into your classrooms that just broke up. And it's even worse when both of that broke up come into your classroom. But all of these things shape you. And aside from that, you also have to teach them the ideas of your discipline and your domain. And a number of other factors. So you get seasoned to be a teacher. You don't get a free pass. You are a kind of person, and the kind of person that you are, a lot of people think anybody can be a teacher. We hear that in the state of Wisconsin all the time. Anybody can be a teacher, and maybe you hear that in your states or your countries. But that's not the reality. Teachers really are special kinds of people, and they are people that spend their lives, or the majority in your lives, in the zone of proximal development, okay? And if you know your Vygotsky, if you don't, it's basically zone of proximal development is between things you can do all on your own and things you can't do yet, no matter how much support you get. And that's where we are, and that's perpetually our environment. We are always in a place where we are working with people that don't know. but need to know, and it's our responsibility to help them know. So we're working on in this particular space, and this space is on a continuum. So every time that we teach them that thing, we don't even get time to celebrate because we have to move on to the next thing that they don't know, and we are perpetually in that space. The other thing about that space on a continuum, though, is that it also moves backwards. It's not one direction. So things that they knew today, they don't know tomorrow, and we have to go back and we have to deal with that. And the other thing about that space is we're dealing with a number of individuals in that space at the same time. So we're dealing with we are residing in all kinds of zones and proximal developments. And now this is the environment that researchers want to come in and intersect with us. And we have a pretty good idea where you came from. And our favorite joke ends with the punchline, you answered a question I didn't ask that I already knew the answer to, now give me back my dog. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but it's a joke about a sheep herder who a consultant pulls up and brings out all this technology and does all these analytics and tells him how many sheep he has. And he says, can I have a sheep? And the sheep herder says, sure. And the guy takes his dog instead of a sheep. And then he says, well, if I tell you who you are, will you give me the sheep back? Or will you give me the animal back? So that's the essence of the joke. And I didn't feel like putting it up there until today, because what captured my mind as I was listening to our presenter today was that the people that are doing this research, they're kind of they would be interested in, well, what kind of technology did he use to count those sheep, and how did he interface this, and what was the validity and the reliability of that? And that's what makes us kind of two different people. Now let me try to explain the difference in terms of the greatest movie ever made, okay? Wizard of Oz and the Man Behind the Curtain. And the man behind the curtain is manipulating an environment, pulling levers, turning dials, and so forth to create a certain kind of environment. So we might say that that's what teachers do. So the man behind the curtain also comes out from behind the curtain and interacts with people that need things in order to improve themselves, like the scarecrow who gets a diploma. And that's what teachers do. So now, if this is a teacher, then is this the researcher? And the answer is no, that's the teacher too. So where's the researcher in this environment? And I think that the researcher is situated in terms of that machine. It's the person that looks at that machine, the dials and the levers and the things we pull. This is our perspective, and basically says, how can we help you, how can you use these tools to make this environment a richer environment, a better type of environment, okay? So that's one thing that researchers do. The other thing that they do is this. You might recall in the movie, the scarecrow gets his brain, and the first thing he does is mathematics, okay? And he says the sum of the squares of the sides of an isosceles triangle is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. Okay, math teachers in here? It's wrong. He says the wrong thing, which is kind of the idea here is it's one thing to give somebody a brain, but it's quite another thing to teach them how to use it, which is what we do, but it's also what researchers are doing. So in this is the intersection of teachers and researchers, is the fact that error detection and error correction. And these are the places where the interface between researchers and teachers can happen, okay? So it's, teachers' attitudes, if I go back and I think about that joke, teachers' attitudes can be a bit populist, the ivory tower and so forth. But the reality is that teachers need to do research. Teachers need to interface with researchers to better understand our environments. And teachers have more opportunity to do that. We have learned more about teaching in the last 30 years than we knew the 150 years previously. And the people that are coming out of school, the people that we are training now, are going to be so much smarter and so much better than I was when I came out of school because they have those opportunities. And they are primed to do research because we are making them do research now in their schools in order to get to these environments. So they're primed to do this, so the opportunity is really good for researchers and teachers to interface. But there's all that history, okay? There's that ivory tower thing. and there's that caution. And a lot of that comes from the way that we have interfaced in the past, but it also comes from the environments that we work in. And so you need to understand that. So another way to think about this interface is with activity theory. Vygotsky's simple model of activity theory, where you have a subject who acts on an object in order to produce a particular outcome using some types of tools. And in this case, the subject would be the teachers act on students using something in order to produce learning. And the question is, what is that something? What are the tools that we use in teaching? Okay. Now, this particular version of the theory doesn't explain it, but Leontiev augmented the theory or elaborated on the theory, and he talked about this hierarchical model. So Leontiev said, well, below the ideas of activity is an idea of action. And the way that he explained this is, let's say a hunter. A hunter hunts in order to get food. But if hunters organize in a social environment, then some of the hunters chase the animals to the people that kill them. Now, those people that are chasing them, they don't eat directly, but they contribute to the end solution. Okay? And so that's the layer of goal versus action. And this is the layer where researchers are situated in our classrooms. Okay? Researchers don't teach students directly, but they can contribute by developing the tools or helping to develop the tools that teachers can use in order to act on objectives and produce particular kinds of outcomes. Okay? Now, the trick to that is when you're working with teachers is you can give them tools, but you can't predict. You can't predict how we're going to use them. And I know this firsthand. I built this little tool that was called Workflow Visualization Tool. It was a pretty nifty little tool where you could actually, it would interface with a CMS, Moodle in this case. And what you could do is you could create these workflows of your lessons. And you could drag icons out into this workspace and you could say this is what happened. And then in the workflows, you could associate student-produced artifacts from doing lessons in the CMS. You could associate them with each one of those icons. So, for example, you could put on this icon, if you attached something that students had to do, maybe they had to fill out a reflection on doing a reading, you could attach all the reflections to that icon, and then you could generate reports. You could also annotate the experience, and so you could document how the learning experience went and how students participated. The idea was you're supposed to be able to ask all kinds of questions about the interactions of students in your classroom and how they actually participated, make some decisions about how the design of your course worked and how it got implemented and so forth. So this actually got picked up and utilized in Madison a little bit. And some of the teachers in Madison, then I met with them in a workshop, and they designed a workflow that looked like this. Okay? And it's not even a workflow. And I said, well, what's this about? And they said, well, what I'm really interested in, what I really want to do is know how well my students did on this thing. So I just threw an icon up there, associated the data with it. I just put icons up there for each thing that I wanted them to know about. So for example, in this one was created by somebody at the UW Medical School. And she said what we wanted was to make sure that students were getting the compulsory things that they had to get done at the right level, that they had to get them done in order to participate in pre-rounds training for the medical students. Okay? There was another teacher in the course or in the workshop, and she wrote almost the same, used almost the same combination of workflows. And what she wanted to do was show that teaching the online, microbiology online, was not as effective as teaching it in a face-to-face environment that looks like this, which I find a dubious claim, but that was what she wanted to use the tool to do, was to make an argument in that way, not what the tool was designed for. Another teacher made even a more simple workflow. He just threw one icon on it, blank, didn't bother to name it or anything, and attached 3 resources to it. This was a guy that was in the School of Engineering, and what he wanted to do was he wanted to know that students were doing particular assignments in preparation for a lab activity where he would interact with them. And so he wanted that information so that he could so that when he looked at students, when he worked with students, he would be able to look and say, well, I know you didn't do this. I know you did all three of the things. I know you did this. So it's prep for and preparation. And that's really a big thing for us in teaching because probably the most dominating factor in our lives is the clock and is time, because we have to get things done in particular times. So we look for things that allow us to do that. Now, we think, as teachers, and especially as experienced teachers, we think that we develop pretty good intuitions. In fact, I would say that learning analytics are trying to mimic the natural intuitions that we develop as teachers. So when I see, so I feel like I can look at students in my classroom, and I can gaze or I can ask some questions, and I can get a pretty good feel for what that student knows, what they don't know, whether they're paying attention or things like that. And so the reality, though, is our intuitions are good about some things, but not so good about other things. And we can actually use data to help us understand primarily academic issues, things about what students know and how they learn. But there's a catch to that, because like this, we used this about 15 years ago. This is a newer report, but we used the NAEP assessment. Well, NAEP is the assessment, National Assessment of Educational Progress. We gave this to our teachers and we said, look at what this is telling us about learning in our environments. And you know what response I got from the teachers? Anybody want to guess? Yeah, give me back my dog. No, well, almost. What they actually said was, those ain't my kids. Okay, yeah, great, national data, national trends, blah, 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 ain't my kids. Okay, but what we did find out was that when we gave them data about their kids, even from standardized testing and stuff, and we mapped it to the things we were doing. So we took data from tests, mapped them to our curriculum guides and said, how are we doing piece by piece? They said, oh, this is interesting, because we actually adapted it to their kids. So one of the things, if we could do that locally, would involve actually writing lessons with good learning objectives, with good assessments that would provide that data. That's the bigger challenge in education for us to do that. But one of the things that help us are standards, okay? So like the Common Core standards, these are the mathematical standards, articulate very specifically things that you can do, and then people take these standards and they use them to write activities to these standards. And they write assessments to these standards. And the idea is that they're all numbered. They're coded in particular ways that we can take that coding and we can start to apply them to lessons, okay? And we can apply them to problems that we ask students to do, okay? So in a math activity, you have a lesson about the experience in relationships and measuring and so forth, and you have these particular activities, and teachers can start to go, oh, I can map this activity to this standard. I can map this activity to this standard, and so forth. We can do this type of mapping, and then we can start to collect data in that way, and we can start to ask questions about that data, okay? So now when you talk about learning analytics, if it's all tagged to that data, what I can do is say, how are students doing on ratios and proportions that are relative to this standard? And I can start to generate maps that will give me information. So now when I look at that kid, I might have intuitively known this kid's not very good at this thing. But now I actually have data behind it that tells me that that kid's not very good at that thing. Now, if you think about longitudinally, let's say that we were collecting data on each kid in our classroom that way, and we started from the time that they were in first grade or kindergarten, and we were collecting these data points all across the way. Now think about a classroom where I'm doing a learning activity, and with this learning activity, the stuff I'm asking them to do, I'm tagging standards to all the things that they're doing in that class. And then think about the fact that I could go back and I could say, relative to the standard, how have they done at this since they were in first grade? First grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. Every time that standard came up, how did they do? Can you generate me a report? And that's what learning analytics allow us to do. That's really powerful because it gives me a lot of information about how this kid has done longitudinally all their life. Not only that, but it gives me information about every kid in my classroom. So I have 30 kids in my classroom with the same profile. then I can generate reports that might show me about all these kids. And I can start to look at these reports of all these kids because, like I mentioned this morning, combinations of kids in the classroom can alter what classrooms look like. And so now I can look at a profile of the classroom and it can tell me, wow, as a class, this group didn't do very good on this type of standard. And it helps me design and teach to that standard and make the modifications that I need to modify, just by looking at things like that. Also tells me if a kid is missing from the class, what will the class profile look like? And sometimes we know that as teachers, if one kid is not in our classroom, it makes a huge difference too. So those are things that teachers think about in the classrooms. For you to think about that interface is when we design stuff, we want to think about the function of what the design does. And so our first keynote, Sana, talked about the complexity of this environment. And that's certainly true. It's hard to pin down all of these variables. But the one constant in the environment is the teacher. And the teacher is like the center of this constellation of variables. It's always constant. And so if we can use analytics to help teachers be reflective about their own practices, where they can look at data that's been generated in their classroom with their students over time and in their classrooms, that is powerful to them because now it is my kids. And it is directly influencing my core goal. And so that's what we really want this to be able to do. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes for questions, and then we've got 5 minutes to transition between rooms so that you'll manage to get in and get a seat next time. Okay, any questions?
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm with D12. We're an LMS vendor. Could you talk about data portability and how you think that might work? Because even within K-12, that might be enough time to switch vendors for something like a LMS or BOE.
Yeah, I on purpose, I just ignored all of those issues. And yeah, I mean, that's a privacy issue. It's the portability issue. I teach at the University of Wisconsin, and we use D12 there, and I like it and I hate it.
I teach with it. I like
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So part of the problem is it's so damn proprietary, but everybody is, but that's just something that you have to run into. So that's an issue. Yeah, that's just an issue that has to be solved. That's beyond the scope of.
Quickly add on that IMS is a great tech standards organization, and maybe we could be talking more about how this problem would be something that we look at for interoperability.
Right, and so that's part of the people that should be sitting at the table, is that's your expertise. My expertise is someplace else, but let's try to work those out. You were going to say?
I had actually a build on to that. I've done some similar work at a technical college where I work at, where what we do is take a pre-entry diagnostic and code the competencies like you said in math, and then do it first day of class, and then try and trace those same competencies over the development of the course. So that readiness competencies are there, but then there's usually sort of like higher end achievement of those. And so similar as a design, you can sort of mimic the longitudinal within the course and just say what they have coming in, what they have after sort of remediation, and where did you wind up at the end of the day. But I think your design is absolutely 100% right. You need to intentionally build in those competencies so they're trackable in a gradebook. So I think the work you're doing it aligns, I think, really well with like a 5 million analytics framework.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. We actually started doing this about 15 years ago in a middle school classroom. We just used FileMaker Pro, and we kind of built our own stuff, and we did this, and it was so an interesting side. Like, my teachers wanted to do it because they wanted to start to track how they were actually teaching. So it got them excited about doing it, and we got some nice returns, and we thought, let's take it a step further. Let's put it in the gradebook. Let's show parents how kids are doing on their standards. Parents hated it. And can you think why parents would hate it? I don't really know it, but my pet theory is that parents didn't like it because it gave them too much information, and now maybe they have to act on that information. That's just an educational thing, different stream. Anyway. Yes?
How are you ensuring that the items you're creating to match with your standards are actually matching with the standard?
Yeah, well, how are we ensuring that? That's a big problem because you really have to have some expertise in test and measurement and validity construction and then reliability. And frankly, classroom teachers don't have that kind of skill. So that's a place where we have to be more deliberate about doing that. And the reality is, it's like trying to take vanilla out of cake batter. You know, the things that you are doing in a classroom, they affect so many different standards. You know, we're just talking about content standards here, but you have affective standards in the classroom too that you want to measure and so forth. And trying to figure out what all those are and do so reliably I wouldn't vouch for the way that we're doing it now. On the other hand, by teachers self-selecting that, they are in a way identifying the things that they think are important for them. And it is an iterative process where we can start to look at what are the returns on this data, kind of like we heard about this morning. What are the returns that we're getting now, and how do we actually generate better data? And that's an interesting question because, frankly, we don't really know what people know. All we can do is make inferences about what we think they know based on the performance on the tasks that we give them. And so then it becomes a question of the quality of the tasks, which then maps into your question about how do you designate what the features of that task are. And you know, crap in, crap out, you know, ask good questions, get good results. So that's really another important piece of the puzzle that we're continually trying to think about too. So
I'm not really sure that the standards have a lot of research behind them in general. I don't think there's been any impact done to determine whether or not those are the right standards, whether or not they're working, or what
yeah,
have you.
well, we hear a lot about that from you know, that's the Common Core argument. The math side of the Common Core arguments were the NCTM standards, and those have been around for quite a long time. And I would say those are more robust maybe than the language arts standards, and frankly, those are the only two sets of standards that we have. But I might agree with you on the language arts side. I might agree with you on the math side too. But I know that they've been around longer and they're a little bit more robust. So I put a little more trust in those. But that's all part of the process. You know, whenever we solve problems, we take our best guesses, and then there's always a feedback loop where you say, well, how well did our best guess work, and can we improve our process? Can we improve our best guesses that we do here? And so it's always this iterative process of trying to make them better. So they're just not absolute. They shouldn't be absolute. You know, curriculum and standards and things like that should be living, breathing documents as far as I'm concerned. I think most educators would say that.
Okay, I think that's probably the end of
Thank you.
the question time. So let's give Alan a